Dear students, myself Dr. Deepa, Assistant Professor from Department of Pharmacology. In this section, I'll be dealing with the neuromuscular junction, neuromuscular transmission and the generation of the action potential and all. So, your specific learning objectives in this section is what is neuromuscular junction, structure of neuromuscular junction and generation of action potential in a motor neuron. What is neuromuscular junction? Neuromuscular junctions are specialized synapses where a motor neuron communicates with a skeletal muscle fiber. This facilitates the transmission of signals from the nervous system to the muscular system, enabling the voluntary muscle contractions. This is a crucial link in the communication between the nerves and muscles, and this has got a fundamental role in the coordination and execution of voluntary muscle movements in the human body. Now about the neuromuscular junction. The skeletal muscle fibers, they are innervated by the large myelinated nerve fibers which are originated from the upper motor neuron from the spinal cord. After entering the muscle, these myelinated fibers, they branches and stimulates from 3 to several hundred skeletal muscle fibers. And each nerve endings, they makes a junction with the muscle fiber near its midpoint. There they forms a neuromuscular junction. And the action potential which has been initiated in the muscle fiber, they travels in both directions towards the muscle fiber ends. And only one neuromuscular junction is present in a muscle with an exception of about 2%. Coming to the structure of neuromuscular junction. To begin with, the axon. The axon is a part of the motor neuron which extends from the cell body to the muscle fiber. And then we have this is the one which conducts the electrical impulses. Axon is the one which conducts the electrical impulses in the form of action potential. About the presynaptic membrane. Presynaptic membrane is the one which conducts these action potential from the motor neuron to the postsynaptic membrane. And we have the mitochondrion which serves as a source of energy which generates the ATP which is required for the proper functioning and maintenance of this presynaptic motor neuron and even for the postsynaptic muscle fiber. We have the synaptic vesicles. So what is the function of the synaptic vesicles? They store, or in the synaptic vesicles, the neurotransmitters are stored. And in NMJ, in the neuromuscular junction, it is the acetylcholine being the neurotransmitter which is being stored in the synaptic vesicles. Then we have the synaptic cleft. So this is a space which separates the presynaptic membrane and the postsynaptic muscle fiber. So this space is what we call as synaptic cleft. We have the subneural cleft. These are specialized regions where we can high concentration of acetylcholine will be there, and even the nicotinic cholinergic receptors are present in this subneural cleft. Now what is neuromuscular transmission? This is your another learning objective where I'll be mainly dealing with, there are different steps which leads to this neuromuscular transmission. In this video mainly I'll be dealing with the generation of the action potential in a motor neuron. So what is neuromuscular transmission? It is the transformation or the transfer of information from the motor nerve endings to the muscle fiber through the neuromuscular junction. So that is what is neuromuscular transmission. So as I told you, there are different steps involved in this neuromuscular transmission. So what are those steps? Generation of action potential in a motor neuron, release of neurotransmitter, here it is the acetylcholine, then binding of this acetylcholine to the receptors or motor end plate, generation of the muscle action potential, and the destruction of acetylcholine. So I'll be mainly dealing here in this video with the generation of action potential in a motor neuron. So the generation of action potential in a motor neuron, it's a complex process, and that involves the propagation of the electrical signals along the neuron's membrane, which ultimately leads to the release of the neurotransmitters at the neuromuscular junction, which then stimulates the muscle contraction. And this action potential generation, which occurs in different phases, that is depolarization, repolarization, then hyperpolarization. We'll see one by one. So before going to the depolarization, you should know what is resting membrane potential. So at rest, what happens? Inside the motor neuron, it will be negatively charged compared to the outer side. Why? This is due to the unequal distribution of the ions across the neuronal membrane. So during the resting membrane potential, that membrane potential will be around -70 to -80 millivolts. So what happens when there is depolarization or when depolarization occurs? So when a signal from the central nervous system reaches the motor neuron, it triggers the opening of ion channels in the neuron's membrane. So this allows, so during that, when there is the opening of ion channels, what happens? Sodium, they rush into the neuron, causing depolarization. So when depolarization reaches a certain threshold, that means at certain level, when there is a rush, what happens? It triggers the opening of more and more amount of sodium ions along the neuronal membrane, and the membrane potential will typically, so that time it will increase. Okay, so there will be a rising phase during this depolarization. So what happens, as I told, when the voltage gated sodium channel opens, it fled into the neuron, causing a rapid influx of positive charge, and there will be further increase in the membrane potential. So this rapid depolarization phase, is the rising phase of action potential. You can see here there will be a rush of sodium ions. Okay, sodium ions, they flood into the neurons. So this will cause a influx of positive charge. So this is a rising phase of depolarization. Next is the falling phase. What is the falling phase? As the membrane potential approaches its peak, that means around 30 millivolt, okay, the voltage gated sodium channels, they begin to close, and there will be opening of the voltage gated potassium channels. And what happens when there is opening of the potassium channels? Potassium ions then flow out of the neuron, causing repolarization and returning the membrane potential to, there will be repolarization and causing the membrane potential to the resting state. Okay, so this is the falling phase. Okay, there will be opening of the closure of the sodium channels and opening of the potassium channels, and there will be flow of the potassium ions. So this is what is a repolarization phase. So there is something else happens after the repolarization. What is that? So what happens is, after repolarization, the membrane potential briefly becomes more negative. See, here there is the resting membrane potential. So what happens is, membrane potential, they become more negative than the resting membrane potential. Why? This is because delaying closing of the potassium channels. This is what we call as hyperpolarization, a stage of hyperpolarization. This is because of the delayed closing of potassium channels. So this is otherwise we call it as undershoot. Okay, this is after repolarization, there will be hyperpolarization. Next is the refractory period. So following an action potential, there is a brief refractory period. Okay, there is absolute refractory period and there is relative refractory period. So during this stage, neuron is less, so further stimulation of the nerve, the neuron will be less responsive. Okay, so this helps to prevent the action potential from traveling backward along the neuron and regulates the firing frequency of the neuron. So this is how an action potential is generated in a motor neuron. I'll just summarize in this slide. That is the resting membrane potential I told. Okay, resting membrane potential. Then slowly there will be a phase of depolarization. Slowly the potassium channels will open here. Okay, graded. Then there will be a rush. Okay, which lead to the rising phase, that is the depolarization phase. Okay, then what happens? Slowly the sodium channel closes. Then there will be opening of the potassium channels. That is the stage of repolarization. Then comes a stage of hyperpolarization, as I told, that goes beyond the resting membrane potential. That is, why? Because it's happening. It is because of the delayed closure of the potassium channels. Okay, then it will come back to that resting membrane potential. So this is how an action potential is generated in a motor neuron. So by this I stop in this video. In the remaining videos I'll be dealing with the synthesis of the acetylcholine, release of the acetylcholine, degradation of the acetylcholine, and how the acetylcholine acts on the nicotinic receptors. Okay. Okay students, happy learning. Thank you.